5:26. To what tribulation did Jesus there refer? Some Bible commentators have reasoned that it was the tribulation that came upon Jerusalem in 70 CE, though they also realized that the events described thereafter evidently would take place at a time that, from a human standpoint, was then distant. They reasoned that the expression immediately after conveyed God's perspective of the time involved, or that the certainty of what was to occur was being expressed by language that placed the events immediately before the reader. However, since the prophecy at Matthew 24:4-22 also missed it 13:5-20 and Luke 21:8-24a clearly has a dual fulfillment, might the tribulation referred to at Matthew 24:29 and Mark 13:24 be the tribulation during the second and final fulfillment of what was foretold at Matthew 24:21 and Mark 13:19? Viewed in the light of the Bible as a whole, this seems most likely. Do the terms used in the Greek text allow for such a view? Definitely. When Matthew 24:29 refers to those days and when Mark 13:24 mentions those days and that tribulation, the Greek grammar does allow for such an understanding. It seems that Jesus' prophecy is saying that after the outbreak of the coming global tribulation, there will be striking phenomena as represented by sun and moon being darkened, stars falling, and powers of heaven being shaken, as well as fulfillment of the sign of the Son of Man. About 3 decades after Jerusalem's destruction, the Apostle John, with reference to great crowd of persons from all nations, tribes, and peoples, was told, "These are the ones that come out of the great tribulation." Re 7:13-14 The fact that a great crowd comes out of the great tribulation shows that they survive it. This is confirmed by a similar expression at Acts 7:9-10. God was with Joseph, and he delivered him out of all his tribulations. Joseph's being delivered out of all his tribulations meant not only that he was enabled to endure them but also that he survived the afflictions he experienced. It is noteworthy that the Apostle Paul referred to the execution of God's judgment upon the ungodly as tribulation. He wrote, "This takes into account that it is righteous on God's part to repay tribulation to those who make textoi acute miritra longo." Tribute 11:28 Paul acknowledged that men such as Apollos, Cephas, and himself in a sense belonged to or were servants of the Corinthian congregation. 1 Co 3:21-22 Yet some in that congregation were criticizing and judging Paul, which attitude grew out of their sectarianism, their fleshliness rather than spirituality, their looking to men instead of to Christ. 1 Co 9:1-4 Paul ably defended his ministry. 1 Co 9:5-27, setting forth the general rule or view that a Christian should not be primarily concerned about the judgment of men, whether by the Corinthians or by some human court on a set day. Rather, Paul was concerned about the future day of judgment or evaluation by God through Jesus. He was the one who had given Paul the stewardship to which he must prove faithful. 1 Co 1:8-4. 2-5. Heb 4:13. Tribute. Generally, money or other valuable consideration, such as livestock, paid by a state or a ruler to a foreign power in acknowledgement of submission, to maintain peace, or to gain protection. For a consideration of the original language words, see taxation. Nations exacting tribute from other peoples frequently received gold and silver or products that were in short supply in their own land. In this way they strengthened their economic position while keeping the subjugated nations weak by drawing heavily on their resources. Judean Kings David 2:8. 2:6, Solomon PS 72:10. Compare 1 Kai 4:21. 10:23-25, Jehoshaphat 2ch 17:10-11, and Uzziah 2ch 26:8, as well as Israelite King Ahab 2 Kai 3:4-5, received tribute from other peoples. However, on account of unfaithfulness, the Israelites were often in an inferior position and were forced to pay tribute to others. As early as the time of the Judges, while under the domination of Moabite King Eglon, they paid tribute. JG 3:12-17 In later years, both the Kingdom of Judah and the Northern Kingdom of Israel paid tribute upon coming under the control of foreign powers. 2 Kai 3. 23. 35. At various times they paid what amounted to a form of tribute when buying off enemy nations or bribing others for military assistance. 2 Kai 12. 18. 15. 19, 20. 18. 13-16. Triumphal procession. A formal procession in celebration of victory over an enemy. The Greek word bo, meaning lead in a triumphal procession, occurs only twice in the scriptures, each time in a somewhat different illustrative setting. 2 Co 2. 14. Col 2. 15. Triumphal processions among the nations. Egypt, Assyria, and other nations commemorated their military victories with triumphal processions. In the days of the Roman Republic, one of the highest honors the Senate could bestow on a conquering general was to allow him to celebrate his victory with a formal and costly procession of triumph in which no detail of pomp and glory was overlooked. The Roman procession moved slowly along via Triumphalis and up the winding ascent to the Temple of Jupiter atop the Capitoline Hill. Musicians playing and singing songs of victory were at the front, followed by young men leading the sacrificial cattle. Then came open carts loaded with booty, and tremendous floats illustrating battle scenes or the destruction of cities and temples, and perhaps topped with a figure of the vanquished commander. The captive kings, princes, and generals taken in the war, with their children and attendants, were led along in chains, often stripped naked, to their humiliation and shame. Next came the general's chariot, decorated in ivory and gold, wreathed with laurel, and drawn by 4 white horses or, on occasion, by elephants, lions, tigers, or deer. The conqueror's children sat at his feet or rode in a separate chariot behind him. Roman consuls and magistrates followed on foot, then lieutenants and military tribunes with the victorious army. All bedecked with garlands of laurel and gifts, and singing songs of praise to their leader. In the vanguard were the priests and their attendants. O textoi acute muritra longo. Tros 1129 of the archers may have represented the yoke of submission under which captives were forced to march. Christians share in triumphal procession. It was from such examples and general knowledge of the times that Paul drew his metaphor when writing to the Corinthians. Thanks be to God who always leads us in a triumphal procession in company with the Christ. 2 Co 2. 14-16. The picture presents Paul and fellow Christians as devoted subjects of God, in company with the Christ, as sons, ranking officers, and victorious soldiers, all following in God's train and being led by him in a grand triumphal procession along a perfumed route. At Colossians 2. 15, the situation is quite different. Here the enemy governments and authorities under Satan are described as the captives and prisoners in the triumphal procession. These Jehovah the Conqueror strips naked and exhibits in open public as defeated ones, the ones conquered by means of it, that is, by means of the torture stake mentioned in the previous verse. Christ's death on the torture stake not only provided the basis for removing the handwritten document, the law covenant, but also made it possible for Christians to be freed from bondage to the satanic powers of darkness. Other processions. The Bible also refers to other processions, occasions when throngs moved along together in celebration of outstanding events. David described Jehovah's victorious procession from Sinai to the Holy Temple site in Jerusalem. War chariots of God, captives, singers and musicians, and congregated throngs blessing the Holy One of Israel. PS 68. 17, 18, 24-26. A procession was included in the inaugural celebration at the time of completion of the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls in the days of Nehemiah. NE 12. 31. And a festival procession is referred to in Psalm 118. 27, evidently in connection with the annual festival of booths. Troas. The principal seaport of NW Asia Minor, from which Paul departed on his first visit to Macedonia, and to which he later returned on occasion. It was located about 30 kilometers 90 miles of the Hellespont Dardanelles and about 25 kilometers 15 miles of the traditional site of ancient Troy. The same Greek term rendered Troas also applied to the Shroud, a region in Mysia that surrounded Troy. The city of Troas was first built during the latter part of the 4th century BCE by Antigonus, one of the generals of Alexander the Great. In 133 BCE it came under Roman control, and thereafter the region of Mysia became part of the Roman province of Asia. Julius Caesar for a time considered transferring the seat of the Roman government to Troas. Emperor Augustus further favored the city by making it a colonia, independent of the provincial governor of Asia, and by exempting its citizens from both land and poll taxes. On Paul's second journey, probably in the spring of 50 CE, and after passing through Phrygia and Galatia, the apostle and his companions came to Troas, for the Spirit of Jesus did not permit them to go into Bithynia. Acts 16. 6-8 Here in Troas, Paul had an unusual vision, one of a man calling to him, "Step over into Macedonia and help us." Immediately it was concluded, God had summoned us to declare the good news to them. The occurrence of us in this text and we in the following verses must mean that, here in Troas, Luke first joined Paul's party and made the voyage with them across the Aegean to Neapolis. Acts 16. 9-12 After leaving Ephesus on his third journey, Paul stopped in Troas and there preached the good news about the Christ, for as he says, "A door was opened to me in the Lord." But after an undisclosed period of time, the apostle became concerned that Titus had not arrived, and so he departed for Macedonia, hoping to find him there. Act 20. 1. 2 Co 2. 12, 13. Evidently Paul spent that winter in Greece before returning again to Troas in the spring of 56 CE. Act 20. 2-6 This o textoi acute miritra longo. Trophimus 1130 Paul's last visit to Carpus' home had been on his third journey in about 56 CE 2-4. 13. Trophimus Trophomidal. Feeding. Nourishing. A co-worker of the Apostle Paul. An Ephesian Gentile Christian. Act 21. 29 Trophimus became a Christian perhaps during Paul's extended Ephesian ministry on his third missionary journey. Afterward Trophimus was one of Paul's traveling companions on the return leg of the trip through Macedonia into Asia Minor and on to Jerusalem. Act 20. 3-5, 17, 22 There Trophimus was seen with Paul, and when Paul took several others along with him into the temple grounds, the Jews thought that Trophimus, the Gentile, went beyond the court of the Gentiles, thereby defiling the temple. On this false assumption they mobbed Paul. Act 21. 26-30. 24. 6 Some years later, after Paul's first imprisonment, Trophimus traveled with him again. But when they got to Miletus, not far from Trophimus' hometown, Trophimus became sick and was unable to continue. 2-4. 20. Trumpet. A wind instrument consisting of a mouthpiece, a long metal tube, and a funnel-shaped end. In the wilderness, before Israel had broken camp for the first time, Jehovah commanded Moses to make 2 trumpets of silver. Of hammerwork. New 10. 2 Although no further description of these instruments is given, coins circulated at the time of the Maccabees and a relief on the Arch of Titus picture the trumpets as being from about 45 to 90 centimeters 1.5 to 3 feet in length, straight, ending in a bell. Josephus states that what Moses made was a kind of clarion with a narrow tube, slightly thicker than a flute, with a mouthpiece wide enough to admit the breath and a bell-shaped extremity such as trumpets have. Jewish Antiquities, 3, 291-12, 6 At the inauguration of Solomon's temple, 120 trumpets were played. 2ch 5. 12. 3 signals are described, employing 2 methods of playing. 1 Blowing both trumpets called the whole assembly of Israel to the tent of meeting. 2 Blowing 1 trumpet would summon only the chieftains who were heads over thousands. And 3 Blowing fluctuating blasts signaled the breaking up of camp. New 10. 3-7. Jehovah further directed that in times of war the trumpets should sound a war call. New 10. 9 This was done thereafter by the priest accompanying the army. New 31. 6 Abijah of Judah, when seeking to avert war with Jeroboam of Israel, pointed to these trumpets for sounding the battle alarm as a divine assurance of Judah's victory in warfare. When Jeroboam stubbornly persisted in his aggression, his forces were defeated by a Judean army that had been greatly encouraged by the priests loudly sounding the trumpets. 2ch 13. 12-15. Trumpets were included among the musical instruments in the temple. 2ch 5. 11-13 The trumpeters were sons of Aaron, the priests. New 10. 8. 2ch 29. 26. S3. 10. NE 12. 40, 41. Every account where the trumpet Heb. Chatso middle.0 is mentioned without the priests being clearly identified as the players is an event of national importance, when the presence of the priests would be expected. It is therefore reasonable to suppose that they were the ones playing the trumpets. 2ch 15. 14. 20. 28. 23. 13. Compare 1ch 15. 24 with verses 28. There is a possibility, though, that a variety of trumpets existed, and some of these may have been possessed by non-priests. Jesus told his hearers not to blow a trumpet gr. Sol middle.piso, related to salpigs, meaning trumpet to attract attention to one's acts of charity in imitation of hypocrites. Mount 6. 2. It is generally suggested that the trumpeting is here figurative, Jesus warning against ostentatiousness in making gifts of mercy. Truth. The Hebrew term emeth, often rendered truth, may designate that which is firm, trustworthy, stable, faithful, true, or established as fact. X 18. 21. 34. 6. 13. 14. 17. 4. 22. 20. Jos 2. 12. 2ch 18. 15. 31. 20. NE 7. 2. 9. 33. As 9. 30. PS 15. 2. O textuale acute miritra longo, Truth 1131 Creation's Testimony. The creative works testify to the fact that God exists. But, according to Paul, even certain of those people who knew God suppressed this truth. Rather than serving God in harmony with the truth concerning his eternal power and godship, they made idols and worshipped these. Not being real gods, idols are an untruth, a lie or falsehood. 10. 14. Hence, these persons, though having the truth of God, exchanged it for the lie and venerated and rendered sacred service to the creation rather than the one who created. Their turning to the falsehood of idolatry lead them into all kinds of degraded practices. Row 1. 18-31. In contrast to man's sinfulness, the degraded practices of non-Jews and the disobedience of the Jews to God's law in no way brought harm to the Creator personally. Instead, his truthfulness, holiness, and righteousness stood out in sharp contrast, and this to his glory. But the fact that man's wrongdoing makes God's righteousness stand out in even greater prominence provides no basis for claiming that God is unjust in executing an adverse judgment against wrongdoers. Being a creation of God, a person has no right to harm himself by sinning. The above is the argument that Paul used in his letter to the Romans, saying, "If our unrighteousness brings God's righteousness to the fore, what shall we say? God is not unjust when he vents his wrath, is he? I am speaking as a man does. Never may that happen. How, otherwise, will God judge the world? Yet if by reason of my lie compare PS 62. 9. The truth of God has been made more prominent to his glory, why am I also yet being judged as a sinner? And why not say, just as it is falsely charged to us and just as some men state that we say, let us do the bad things that the good things may come. The judgment against those men is in harmony with justice. Row 3. 5-8. God has delivered his people, not for a course of sin, but for a life of righteousness, that they may glorify him. The apostle says later in his letter, neither go on presenting your members to sin as weapons of unrighteousness, but present yourselves to God as those alive from the dead, also your members to God as weapons of righteousness. Row 6. 12, 13. What is the meaning of the statement that Jesus Christ is himself the truth? Like his Father Jehovah, Jesus Christ is full of undeserved kindness and truth. Job 1. 14. F4. 21. While on earth, he always spoke the truth as he had received it from his Father. Job 8. 40, 45, 46. He committed no sin, nor was deception found in his mouth. 1 Pe 2. 22 Jesus represented things as they really were. Besides being full of truth, Jesus was himself the truth, and truth came through him. He declared, I am the way and the truth and the life. Job 14. 6. And the Apostle John wrote, the law was given through Moses, the undeserved kindness and the truth came to be through Jesus Christ. Job 1. 17. John's words do not mean that the law given through Moses was erroneous. It, too, was truth, conforming to God's standard of holiness, righteousness, and goodness. PS 119. 151. Row 7. 10-12 However, the law served as a tutor leading to Christ. 3. 23-25 and had a shadow, or prophetic picture, of greater realities. Hab 8. 4, 5. 10. 1-5 Providing a shadow, the Lord, though truthful, was not the full truth and, therefore, had to give way to the realities that it foreshadowed. This point is emphasized by the Apostle Paul in his letter to the Colossians. Let no man judge you in eating and drinking, or in respect of a festival, or of an observance of the new moon or of a Sabbath. For those things are a shadow of the things to come, but the reality belongs to the textoi acute miritra longo. Truth 11:32 God's Spirit would teach them everything they needed to know to carry out their work, recalling and opening up to their understanding things they had previously heard from Jesus but had not understood. Job 14. 26 God's Spirit would also declare to them the things coming. This could include bringing to light the significance of Jesus' death and resurrection, as these events were then yet future and were among the things that his disciples did not understand. Mount 16. 21-23. Lu 24. 6-8, 19-27. Joe 2. 19-22. 12. 14-16. 20. 9 Of course, God's Spirit later also enabled Christ's followers to foretell future happenings. Act 11. 28. 20. 29, 30. 21. 11. 1-4. 1-3 Being the Spirit of the truth, God's Holy Spirit could never be the source of error, but would protect Christ's followers from doctrinal falsehoods. Compare 1 Joe 2. 27. 4. 1-6. It would bear witness to the truth regarding Jesus Christ. From Pentecost 33 CE onward, God's Spirit bore witness by helping Jesus' disciples to understand the prophecies that clearly proved that Jesus was the Son of God. On the basis of these prophecies, they bore witness to others. Job 15. 26, 27. Compare 2. 14-36. Row 1. 1-4. Even before Pentecost, though, the Spirit of the truth had been bearing witness to the fact that Jesus is the Son of God. 1 Job 5. 5-8, for it was by this Spirit that Jesus was anointed and enabled to perform powerful works. Job 1. 32-34. 10. 37, 38. Act 10. 38. See Spirit. God's Word is truth. God's Word presents things as they really are, revealing Jehovah's attributes, purposes, and commands, as well as the true state of affairs among mankind. God's Word of truth shows what is required for one to be sanctified or made holy, set apart for use by Jehovah in his service, and then to remain in a sanctified state. Hence, Jesus could pray respecting his followers. Sanctify them by means of the truth. Your word is truth. Job 17. 17. Compare Judges 1. 18. Their obedience to the revealed truth of God's word led them into sanctification, the truth being the means by which they purified their souls. 1 Pe 1. 22 Thus they stood out as no part of the world that did not adhere to God's truth. Job 17. 16. Walking in the truth. Those who desire to gain God's approval should walk in his truth and serve him in truth. Job 24. 14. 1 So 12. 24. PS 25. 4, 5. 26. 3-6. 43. 3. 86. 11. ISA 38. 3. That would include abiding by God's requirements and serving Him in faithfulness and sincerity. To a Samaritan woman Jesus Christ said, "The hour is coming, and it is now, when the true worshippers will worship the Father with spirit and truth, for, indeed, the Father is looking for such like ones to worship Him. God is a spirit, and those worshipping Him must worship with spirit and truth." Job 4. 23, 24. Such worship could not be based on imagination, but would have to conform to what is in harmony with the actual state of things, consistent with what God has revealed in His Word about Himself and His purposes. Christianity is the way of the truth. 2 Pe 2. 2. And those who assist others in furthering the interests of Christianity become fellow workers in the truth. 3 Job 8. The entire body of Christian teachings, which later became part of the written Word of God, is the truth or the truth of the good news. Adherence to this truth, walking in it, is essential if an individual is to gain salvation. Row 2. 8. 2 Co 4. 2. F1. 13. 1T2. 4. 2T4. 4. T1. 1, 14. Heb 10. 26. 2 Joe 1-4. 3 Joe 3, 4. In the case of those who conduct themselves aright, the truth, the conformity of their ways to God's word and the actual results of their course, testifies to the fact that they are examples worthy of imitation. 3 Joe 11, 12. On the other hand, a person who departs from the basic teachings of Christianity, either by conducting himself improperly or by advocating false doctrine, is no longer walking in the truth. This was the situation of those o textoi acute miritra longo, turning around 1133. They're being qualified to teach. Their claim would be false. As the disciple James wrote, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show out of his fine conduct his works with a mildness that belongs to wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and contentiousness in your hearts, do not be bragging and lying against the truth." Just 3. 13, 14. For the Christian congregation to be a pillar and support of the truth, the members thereof must, through fine conduct, manifest the truth in their lives. F5. 9. They have to be consistent and undeviating in right conduct, as if girded about with truth. F6. 14. Besides maintaining personal purity, Christians must be concerned about congregational purity. When emphasizing the need to keep the Christian congregation clean from the defilement of lawless persons, the Apostle Paul wrote, "Clear away the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, according as you are free from ferment. For, indeed, Christ our Passover has been sacrificed. Consequently let us keep the festival, not with old leaven, neither with leaven of badness and wickedness, but with unfermented cakes of sincerity and truth." 1 Co 5. 7, 8. Since Jesus Christ was sacrificed only once, compare Heb 9. 25-28 is the reality of the Passover lamb. The entire life course of the Christian, comparable to the festival of unfermented cakes, should be free from injuriousness and wickedness. There must be a willingness to remove what is sinful to maintain personal and congregational purity, and thus to keep the festival with unfermented cakes of sincerity and truth. Trifina trimiddle. Fina from a gr. Root meaning live in luxury. A Christian woman in Rome, whom Paul greets in his letter and commends for her hard labor. Row 16. 12. Trifina and Trifosa, with whom she is listed, may have been fleshly sisters, for it was not unusual for family members to have names derived from the same root word, as in this case. Both names were common among women of Caesar's household. But the record is silent as to whether these two women belonged to that household. PHP 4. 22. Trifosa trimiddle. Fosa from a gr. Root meaning live in luxury. A Christian woman of Rome greeted and commended by Paul. Row 16. 12. See Trifina. Zeder. Final, the middle. The 18th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It is one of the 5 Hebrew letters that have a different form when used as the final letter of a word. It is a strong hissing sound similar to the sound of th in English. In the Hebrew, it appears as the initial letter in each of the 8 verses in Psalm 119. 137-144. Soha. Siyak number 1. Tubal Tubal. 1. One of the 7 sons of Japheth. GE 10. 2. 1 ch1. 5. 2. A people or a land usually mentioned along with Meshech, the name of another of Japheth's sons. Tubal, along with Javan and Meshech, engaged in trading with Tyre, dealing in slaves and copper articles. As 27. 13 In Ezekiel's dirge over Egypt, Tubal was included among the uncircumcised ones with whom the Egyptians would lie in Sheol, because of the terror they had wrought. As 32. 26. 27 The people of Tubal also are included among those uniting with Gog of the land of Magog, who is called the head chieftain of Meshech and Tubal, and who comes storming out of the remotest parts of the north in a fierce attack against Jehovah's people. As 38. 2, 3. 39. 1, 2. See Gog no. 2. In another prophecy, Jehovah foretells that he will send envoys to proclaim his glory to Tubal, Javan, and other lands. Issa 66. 19. Tubal thus lay to the end of Israel, but not so distant as to be out of commercial contact with Tyre in Phoenicia. Most scholars consider the name to refer to the same people as the Tubali of Assyrian inscriptions, where Tubali and Musku evidently Meshech are mentioned together. Ancient Near Eastern Texts, edited by J. Pritchard, 1974, p. 284 Some centuries later, Herodotus 3, 94 Also O textoi acute miritra longo, turquoise 1134 turquoise. A semi-precious, opaque, porous gemstone, ranging in color from pale sky blue to dull green. It is composed of hydrous phosphate of aluminum with traces of copper the blue color source and iron the green color source. When the blue stones are heated or exposed to the weather, they turn green, which sometimes happens when the stones lose their natural moisture with the passing of time. This may account for the seeming popularity of green turquoise stones in ancient times. The early Egyptians used turquoise for jewelry, and it is found on the Sinai Peninsula as nodules in a red sandstone. Turquoise is easy to engrave because it is a comparatively soft stone. The high priest Aaron wore an engraved turquoise stone on his breastpiece of judgment. Inscribed upon it was the name of one of Israel's 12 tribes, and it was positioned first in the second row of stones on the breastpiece. X 28. 2, 15, 18, 21. 39. 11 The figurative covering worn by the king of Tyre is depicted as being adorned with turquoise, along with every other sort of precious stone. As 28. 12, 13 Edom was Tyre's merchant for turquoise, for which Tyre was willing to give some of its stores in exchange. As 27. 2, 16. Turtle dove Heb. Tor. Gr. Trimidal.gon. A small wild pigeon, usually with strong migratory habits. The Hebrew name evidently imitates the plaintive cry of ta'a made by the bird. The varieties of turtle dove most frequently found in Palestine are the common turtle dove Streptoplia tucha and the collar turtle dove Streptoplia decaocto, the latter so named from a narrow black collar at the back of the neck. Another variety, the palm turtle dove or laughing dove Streptoplia senegalensis, has steadily extended its range in Israel in recent decades. The turtle dove is mentioned in Jeremiah 8. 7 among the birds that observe well the time of each one's coming in, evidently indicating annual migration. Reference must be to the common turtle dove, since the others found in Palestine do not migrate but stay there all year round. The common turtle dove was an unerring harbinger of spring in Palestine, arriving there from the east in early April and making its voice heard in the land. K2. 12. A shy, gentle bird, the turtle dove relies on speedy flight as a means of escaping its enemies. PS 74. 19 During their season turtle doves are quite abundant throughout Palestine. And since they feed on grain, seeds, and clover, they are easily captured by ground snares. Abraham included a turtle dove in his offering at the time Jehovah concluded a covenant with him. GE 15. 9, 10, 17, 18, and thereafter the Mosaic law either specified or allowed for the use of turtle doves in certain sacrifices and purification rites. The 1. 14. 5. 7, 11. 12. 6, 8. 14. 22, 30. 15. 14, 15, 29, 30. New 6. 10, 11. Mary offered either 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons at the temple following Jesus' birth. Lu 2. 22-24. Sea dove. Pigeon. Tutor. The tutor of Bible times was generally not the actual teacher, but the one who accompanied the child to and from school and possibly in other activities as well. He would turn the child over to the instructor. This continued from childhood to perhaps puberty or longer. He was to keep the child from physical or moral harm. So, too, the old French tutor and Latin tutor mean, literally, a protector or guardian. However, the duties of the tutor also involved the matter of discipline, and he might be charged with instructing the child in matters of conduct. The tutor's discipline could be severe, whether they were slaves or were paid tutors. Therefore, Galatians 3. 24, 25 points out that the law has become our tutor. Gr. Pi middle dot dar middle dot go middle dot goes, literally child leader leading to Christ, that we might be declared righteous due to faith. But now that the faith has arrived, we are no longer under a tutor. The law was strict. It o texto e acute miritra longo, Tyre 1135. To rest had an added factor, because he experienced the labor of spiritual parenthood with them. Compega 4. 11, 19, 20. See education. Instruction. 12, the. See apostle. Tychicus Tychi middle dot cus from a root meaning fortune. Success. One of Paul's aides, a beloved brother and faithful minister and fellow slave in the Lord from the district of Asia. Col 4. 7. Tychicus was a member of Paul's party returning from Greece through Macedonia into Asia Minor. But whether or not Tychicus went all the way to Jerusalem is not stated. Act 20. 2-4. Tychicus is one of several persons suggested as the brother who, while in Greece, helped Titus to arrange the collection for the brothers in Judea. 2 Co 8. 18, 19. 12. 18. From his prison in Rome, Paul sent Tychicus with letters to Ephesus and Colossae, promising that Tychicus would tell them more about his state of affairs and be of comfort to them. Onesimus is mentioned in the letter to the Colossians as accompanying him. F6. 21, 22. Col 4. 7-9. Following Paul's release from prison, he contemplated sending either Artemas or Tychicus to Crete. Tilt 3. 12. When the apostle was back in a Roman prison for the second time, he dispatched Tychicus to Ephesus. 2t4. 12. Tyrannus time middle dot ranus absolute ruler. Sovereign. A name connected with the Ephesian school auditorium in which Paul preached for 2 years after having encountered resistance in the Jewish synagogue. Act 19. 9, 10. Tyrock. The principal Phoenician seaport. Identified with present-day Sur, situated about 50 km 30 mi of Mount Carmel and 35 km 22 mi SSW of Sidon. Picture, Volume 2, p. 531. Tyre was in ancient city Sur 23. 1, 7, but just when it was founded as a colony by the Sidonians is not known. It is first mentioned after the conquest of the Promised Land in about 1467 BCE, and at that time it was a fortified city. This mention of Tyre was in connection with the boundaries of Asher's tribal territory. From the start, and all through its history, Tyre apparently remained outside Israel's borders as an independent neighbor. Jos 19. 24, 29. 2-24. 7. Friendly relations existed at times between Tyre and Israel, notably during the reigns of David and Solomon. Skilled Tyrian workmen engaged in building David's royal palace with cedar timber sent by Hiram the king of Tyre. 2-5. 11. 1ch 14. 1 The Tyrians also supplied David with cedar later used in the temple's construction. 1ch 22. 1-4. After David's death, King Hiram of Tyre furnished Solomon with materials and assistance for the construction of the temple and other government buildings. 1 Chi 5. 1-10. 7. 1-8. 2ch 2. 3-14 A half-Israelite son of a Tyrian worker in copper, who himself was a skilled craftsman, was employed in the construction of the temple. 1 Chi 7. 13, 14. 2ch 2. 13, 14 For their assistance the Tyrians were paid with wheat, barley, oil, and wine. 1 Chi 5. 11, 12. 2ch 2. 15 In addition, Solomon gave the king of Tyre 20 cities, though the Tyrian monarch was not overly pleased with the gift. 1 Chi 9. 10-13. Tyre in time became one of the great sea powers of the ancient world, and her mariners and commercial fleet of Tarshish ships were famous for their voyages to faraway places. Solomon and the king of Tyre cooperated in a joint shipping venture for the importing of precious things including gold from Ophir. 1 Chi 9. 26-28. 10. 11, 22. 2ch 9. 21. In all the dealings the Tyrians had with Israel, there is no indication that, as a people, they were interested in the worship of Jehovah. Their association was particularly a commercial one. Racially they were Canaanites, and religiously they practiced a form of Baal worship, their chief deities being Melkart and Astarte-Ashtaroth. When Ethbaal was king of the Sidonians including Tyre, his daughter Jezebel married Ahab, the king of the northern kingdom of Israel. Jezebel was infamous in her determination to blot out the worship of Jehovah. O textoi acute miritra longo, Tyrian 1136 glassware, and purple dyes and was a trading center for the overland caravans as well as a great import-export depot. Along with this industrial and commercial growth came riches, conceit, and pride. Her merchants and tradesmen boasted of being princes and honorable ones of the earth. Issa 23. 8 Tyre in time also developed an attitude of opposition to Jehovah and conspired with neighboring nations against God's people. PS 83. 2-8 So it was her bold defiance of Jehovah that eventually brought upon the city adverse judgment, downfall, and destruction. In the latter part of the 9th century BCE Jehovah took note of this city's arrogant attitude. He therefore warned her that she would be paid back in kind for robbing his people of the gold, silver, and many other desirable things that she had used to beautify her temples. There was also to be an accounting for Tyre's having sold God's people into slavery. Job 3. 4-8. Am 1. 9, 10. Later the prophet Isaiah recorded a further pronouncement against Tyre, which indicated that she would be forgotten for 70 years. Issa 23. 1-18 Years thereafter the prophet Jeremiah included Tyre among those nations that were singled out to drink the wine of Jehovah's rage. Job 25. 8-17, 22, 27. 27. 2-7. 47. 2-4 Since the nations mentioned in the prophecy of Jeremiah were to serve the king of Babylon 70 years Job 25. 8-11 This suggests that both the prophecy of Isaiah and that of Jeremiah related to Nebuchadnezzar's campaign against Tyre. Also through Ezekiel, a contemporary of Jeremiah, Jehovah pointed to calamity for Tyre at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. Ez 26. 1. 28. 19 Though Tyre had been compared to a pretty ship with multicolored sails and deck coverings and a prow inlaid with ivory, she would sink in the open sea. Ez 27. 3-36 Tyre's king, apparently the line of Tyrian rulers haughtily boasted. I am a god. In the seat of God I have seated myself. But he was to be removed as profane and destroyed by fire. Ez 28. 2-19. Destruction of city. In the course of Nebuchadnezzar's long siege against Tyre, the heads of his soldiers were made bald from the chafing of their helmets, and their shoulders were rubbed bare from carrying materials used in the construction of siege works. Since Nebuchadnezzar received no wages for serving as his instrument in executing judgment upon Tyre, Jehovah promised to compensate him with the wealth of Egypt. As 29. 17-20 According to the Jewish historian Josephus, the siege lasted 13 years against Apian, I. 156, and it cost the Babylonians a great deal. Secular history does not record exactly how thorough or effective Nebuchadnezzar's efforts were. But the loss in lives and property to the Tyrians must have been great. As 26. 7-12. When the Israelites returned from Babylonian exile, however, the Tyrians were able to assist in supplying cedar timbers from Lebanon for a second temple, and they resumed their trade with the rebuilt city of Jerusalem. As 3. 7. NE 13. 16. Tyre's conflict with Nebuchadnezzar, though great, was not to be the complete end for Tyre. A later prophetic pronouncement indicated that, though Tyre would build a rampart and pile up silver and gold, Jehovah himself would destroy her completely. Zech 9. 3, 4. Nearly 200 years after Zechariah's prophecy was given, it was fulfilled. In 332 BCE Alexander the Great marched his army across Asia Minor and, in his sweep southward, paused long enough to give his attention to Tyre. When the city refused to open its gates, Alexander in his rage had his army scrape up the ruins of the mainland city and throw it into the sea, thus building a causeway out to the island city, all of this in fulfillment of prophecy. As 26. 4, 12. Diagram, Vol 2, p. 531 With his naval forces holding the Tyrian ships bottled up in their harbour, Alexander set about constructing the highest siege towers ever used in ancient Otextoi Acute Muritra Longo, 1137 Ukal Ukal. One to whom Agur spoke the words found in Proverbs chapter 30. Ukal may have been a son or disciple of Agur, but nothing definite is known about him. PR 30. 1. Uel. One of the sons of Bani who sent away their foreign wives and sons in response to Ezra's counsel. As 10. 10, 11, 34, 44. Ulai. A watercourse flowing through or near Shushan Susa in Elam. Along the Ulai, Daniel received the vision of the ram and the hagoat. It cannot be determined whether the prophet actually went there from Babylon or was transported to that location in a visionary way. Diet. 1-3, 6, 16 Conjectures about the Ulai vary considerably, and identification is difficult because rivers in the vicinity seem to have changed course somewhat through the centuries. One view is that the Ulai is the Kakha River. According to another, it was an artificial canal to the En or Eni of Shushan connecting the Kakha with another river. Ulam. 1. Father of Bedan. Of the tribe of Manasseh. 1 Ch 7. 14, 16, 17. 2. A distant descendant of Saul, of the tribe of Benjamin, whose sons were outstanding archers. Olam's descendants, sons and grandsons, numbered some 150 in the time of the chronicler. 1 Ch 8. 33, 39, 40. Ulcer. An open bodily sore other than a direct wound, though the inflammatory type usually results from a minor injury, such as a skin abrasion. Ulcers are either external or internal, developing on the skin or on mucous surfaces. They often discharge pus and cause progressive disintegration and death of tissue in the affected area. Inflammatory ulcers, with their hot, aching sensation, often develop on the lower part of a person's leg. In the Hebrew scriptures, the word sometimes translated ulcer is mar-middle.zor, which can apply to an ulcer, a sore, or a boil. Certain scholars believe that it refers to a wound of the kind that might require the pressing out of matter within it. The Greek word onkos, denoting an ulcer, is used in the Christian Greek scriptures. It appears in the Greek Septuagint at Exodus 9. 9 and Job 2. 7 for the Hebrew word sheken, which signifies a boil. See boil. Figurative use. Prophetically, Ephraim Israel was depicted as being sick and Judah as having an ulcer, conditions resulting from their wrongdoing and consequent loss of God's favor. But, instead of trusting in Jehovah for protection from their foes, they futilely sought aid from the king of Assyria, who was unable to heal them of their ulcerous condition. Ho 5. 13 Later, Zion, her people having been taken into Babylonian exile, was represented as being afflicted with an ulcer. J30. 12-15, 17. Compare Lu 16. 20, 21. Re 16. 2, 10, 11. Allah. And Asherah, whose 3 sons were tribal family heads and valiant warriors. 1 Ch 7. 39, 40. Amba. A city of undetermined location on the boundary of Asher's territory. Jos 19. 29-31. Some scholars think that resulted from a textual alteration of Akko, the latter name appearing here in some manuscripts of the Greek Septuagint and in the list at JG 1. 31, but this is not certain. Uncle. The Hebrew term dod, at times rendered uncle or father's brother. Latin. 4. 20. 20. 25. 49. New 36. 11. 1 So 10. 14-16. 14. 50. As 2. 7, 15. J 32. 7-9, 12. Am 6. 10 is much broader in its application than the English word uncle. It not only applies to a kinsman, usually the father's brother, but can also denote in the singular or plural love. PR 7. 18. Expressions of endearment or of love. 1. 2, 4. As 16. 8. 23. 17, and a dear one or loved one. 1. 14, 16. Is 5. 1. The context or other related scriptures, however, often establish the family relationship designated by the Hebrew word dod. For example, dod is used to describe the relationship of King Jehoiachin to King Zedekiah. Since Zedekiah was the brother of Jehoiachin's father Jehoiakim, the word dod in this case obviously designates otextoi acute miritra longo. Unclean animals. 1138. Mother's side of the family is designated in Hebrew by the expression mother's brother. GE 29. 10. The son of Paul's sister revealed to Paul and then to the Roman commander of Jerusalem the plot that had been hatched against his uncle's life. Act 23. 16-22. Unclean animals. See animals. Uncleanness. See clean, cleanness. Understanding. The original language words rendered understanding can refer to comprehension of a rather simple kind or can describe a full and profound realization of the inner nature, underlying reasons, and significance of complex matters. Insight, discernment, and perception are all closely connected to understanding. The Hebrew verb bin and the noun by middle dot na are most frequently related to understanding. At times bin and by middle dot na may more particularly emphasize the specific aspects of discerning. 1 Set 3. 8. 2 So 12. 19. PS 19. 12. Da 9. 2. Giving thoughtful consideration to 32. 7. PR 14. 15. 23. 1. Ch 2. 10. Da 11. 37 or attention job 31. 1. 32. 12. 37. 14. PS 37. 10 to a matter, and may be so rendered. Professor R. C. Bentane, writing in the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible edited by G. Buttrick, 1962, Volume 4, p. 733, says, the root bin means primarily to discern with the senses, to perceive distinctions, then to give close attention to, and finally, particularly in the derived stems, to gain comprehension or give it to others. Hebrew scholar Gesenius gives the basic senses to separate, to distinguish. Hence to discern, to mark, to understand, all of which depend on the power of separating, distinguishing, discriminating. A Hebrew and English lexicon of the Old Testament, translated by E. Robinson, 1836, p. 140. Another noun, to view middle. Na, comes from the same root as by middle dot na and may be appropriately rendered discernment pr 10. 23. 11. 12 or understanding x 31. 3. To 32. 28, according to the context. The basic meaning of these terms reveals the understanding person to be one able to see into a matter and discern its composition by separating the individual factors or features that compose or act together to form the whole, then to perceive the relationship between them and thus comprehend, or grasp, the significance or meaning of the matter. This may be illustrated with a language. If a person is to understand what is spoken in a certain tongue, he must be able to distinguish the individual words composing the sentences, know their meaning, and see how they relate to one another. De 28. 49. However, even though a person may basically comprehend what is said to him, understanding can also go beyond such simple comprehension. It means that he gets the real significance and sense of the message, then is able to evaluate it, benefit by it, and know what action it calls for. When Ezra the priest read the law before the people in Jerusalem, all intelligence from Heb been enough to listen were gathered. Even though these his mature minds able to understand all the words, the Levites were explaining the law to the people, instructing the people in the law, or giving understanding form of bin. Reading aloud from the book, from the law of the true God, it being expounded, and there being a putting of meaning into it. And they continued giving understanding in the reading. Any 8. 2, 3, 7, 8. In the Greek scriptures, understanding, as signifying perception, getting the sense of a matter, is represented especially by the verb see me literally, put together, and the related noun see-ne sis. Other terms are pi station my, meaning, basically, know well, and gi no sco, meaning know. Source of understanding. Jehovah God is both the source of understanding and the supreme example of its use. The splendid coordination and functioning of the universe, in which each creation serves a particular and harmonious purpose, with no clashes or problems resulting from an lack of text or acute miritra longo. Understanding 1139. Creator and humbly recognize his own lack of understanding. Job 42. 1-6. As regards man, Jehovah can exercise insight into the thoughts and doings of all mankind. 1 ch 28. 9. PS 139. 1-6, and as he chooses, he gives thoughtful consideration heb bin or attention to individuals and classes. PR 21. 12. PS 5. 1, 2. He knows his own invincible purpose and what he will do in the future. His righteous standards are fixed, unchangeable. Hence, there is no wisdom, nor any discernment, nor any counsel in opposition to Jehovah. PR 21. 30. Compare Isa 29. 13, 14. J 23. 20. 30. 24. He needs to consult no one to understand a matter, such as how to help his servants effectively or how to relieve them from distress and oppression. Isa 40. 10-15, 27-31. Knowledge of Jehovah God and discernment of his will combined with faith and trust therefore form the foundation of all true understanding on the part of his intelligent creatures. Knowledge of the Most Holy One is what understanding is, and this includes understanding righteousness and judgment and uprightness, the entire course of what is good. PR 9. 10. 2. 6-9. 16. 20. No matter of real importance can be fully understood unless all the factors are viewed from Jehovah's standpoint and seen in relation to his standards, qualities, and eternal purpose. Those turning from the source. The person who turns to transgression begins to discount God as a factor to be considered when making decisions and plans. Job 34. 27. Such a person allows his heart to blind him to the wrongness of his ways and he loses insight. PS 36. 1-4. Even if claiming to worship God, he puts men's precepts above God's. He prefers them. Isa 29. 13, 14. He rationalizes and excuses his loose conduct as mere sport. PR 10. 23. And becomes perverted, brutish, stupid in his reasoning, to the extreme of assuming that the invisible God does not see or discern his wrongdoing, as though God's powers of perception had failed. PS 94. 4-10. ISA 29. 15, 16.